Hi, logical people. GKV here. I'm both sad and excited today. I'm sad because this is the last video of this fundamental tutorial series, and I'm excited because after this, we are ready to launch another awesome tutorial series with Bootstrap. For people who don't know what Bootstrap is, I can draw a parallel with the Next framework. Just like Next is a framework for JavaScript, Bootstrap is a framework to build beautiful responsive websites that can be run on any screen size devices, which means mobile phone, tablets, laptop, or even bigger screens. Anyway, enough about Bootstrap. Let's not talk about API routes. These are our learning objectives. We want to learn what is API routing, and we will also go through. And as always, at the end of the video, I'm going to share some tips and tricks. So stay tuned and make sure you watch the whole video. With that, let's get started. Alright, I'm back on my local host, and this is where I left you. We are able to bake pizza, we are able to sell pizza, we are able to go to the checkout page, we are able to come back to home page, and this all is working fine. Now we want to dive into the APIs and understand what does API mean. So the way API works in Next is actually very simple. There's a special folder called API that is provided to us, and whatever you create inside this API will become an API route, much like the pages, pages routes that you create for your web app. So I'll go here and I'll say get TUS to your customer data.tsx. Now this name could be anything, but as you know, whatever the file name would be, that file name will become the path of the API. So we're gonna get to that very soon. First, let's create an API. So I'll say const handler. You're master of this already. So whenever you create a function or a component or handler, whatever you wanna call it, for APIs, the next will automatically pass two variables to it. One is request and one is response. So the request basically contains everything that a browser sends to this server or API. For example, again, if you go back here, if you go back to network, if you take any of these, let's send it again. Okay, so if you go to this one and select one of these, you can see that in the header, the browser sends a lot of data like requested URL, what was the method. That data is provided by Next to this function in the request object. And if you look back, there's a response object which contains some data. That is the response object that one must set when they are working on these functions. So let's see that in action. First thing first, let's export this. Okay. Now what we want to do, we want to log request equals to request. And response equals to response. We want to see what did we get. Also, TypeScript is complaining that the type of this is not defined. Do you want to have a quick fix? Let's try if it's able to figure it out. It says any, which is not the best representation. I'm going to come back to this and we'll see what is the exact object name. Going back to index page. Now somehow we have to call this. Now somehow we have to call this handler. The way you do that is via fetch function. So what we will do is we'll go here and we'll create a button. Create a button. Type is of course button. We'll say get customer data. And we'll say on click and then get data, right? Make sure you already know this. You're already typing ahead of me, and I like it. Now here we want to call an API. What that means is, and to do that, we need to go to Google and take a small help. So if we go here and we say API call in React, for example. They've given us some example, and the important thing is we're talking about this fetch function. So let's go and see what this fetch function does. The reason I'm doing all this Googling is because when you're not looking at a tutorial, you must know what you're looking for. And if you don't know what you're looking for, you at least need to know how to search for that on Google and find answers for your question. So it's saying fetch API provides an interface for fetching resources. Okay. Is there an example? Let's see. There you go. It says fetch and then the resource, fetch and initialize. So resource could be any URL from where we can get some data, which is helpful. And in the init, which is obviously optional, you can provide some parameters like which method, what is the header, what is the body, and things like that. The method is an important parameter, and there are multiple types of methods that you can use. The most popular ones are get and post. So if we go here and click on get, it says get HTTP method request is a representation of specific resource. Okay, and it looks something like this, which is a complex or convoluted way of saying that going to google.com. When you go to browser and type google.com, this action is basically a get request. And then there is a post request. And if you're not 100% sure what get and post means, you can comment in the comment section and I'll probably design a tutorial for that. Anyway, so since this is a next tutorial, we're not going too deep into get and post. Now coming back, now since we understand we need to use the fetch method, let's go back to our Visual Code and we're going to say fetch open parenthesis, and it gives us some hint. It needs to know where to look and some initial parameters which we just saw on the Google. So let's do that. I'll say const URL is equals to API/get customer data. That would be my URL. Now notice I have started with a slash, which means that since we are working on localhost, eventually this will become something like this when the request will go out of this machine to some server. Now you should immediately realize that if you can do this, then you can also do this, google.com, which means that you can actually go and fetch for any resource that is available, either free, either private or public, depending on restrictions. You can fetch any data that you like. Beautiful. Now fetch does not return something directly. So if I say fetch response equals to this, you know what? Let's do this. So I'm going to log the response and we'll see what do we get. And of course, we are not returning anything from our get customer data. Let's try and return something so that we're able to log that. So I'll say status 200 notification in GKV. So we have done a couple of things. What we are saying is whatever the response object is, set the status to 200 and then also send some data in a JSON format. In that data, the key will be name and the value will be GKV. Now again, the status 200 is probably out of the scope of this tutorial, but this basically means that everything is okay. We're gonna say await. And whenever you use await, you have to say async at the top of your method here. This tells Next that hey, this is a function that might wait for some data that could be resolved in the future. It might not get like right away. It might take some time to resolve it. Okay. As we learned, response is also a promise. So we'll say data equals to rest.json, right? And let's log the data. If we go back here, clear everything, click here, we'll see that we received the data that we sent from the API. Anyway, so now we got the data, which is a good news. There's one thing I'm not sure if you're wondering or if you noticed. If we go back to our API, we did log two things, request and response, and we never saw that on this console. And that is because everything that you write inside this API folder is running on the server side. When I say server side, what it means is that if you remember from one of our very early videos, we mentioned that this .next project is generated whenever you run npm dev. If I close my server and I go here and I delete this folder, I go here and I say npm run dev, you will see that it will spin up a new server, of course, and it will also produce that .next folder for us. What that means is what Next is doing, it is taking everything that we have in the pages folder except this API folder and converting everything into JavaScript, HTML, and CSS. So when you are fetching data from a database and doing something that is secret or proprietary, you don't want to put that into the main pages. You tend to do that on the server side. So that's first thing. Now that we know that this is on the server side, that should give you some hint that why when we click on this button, we do get this data, but we never see anything in the console. That is because we are getting everything here in the console. See here, we get long list of data. And this is essentially our request and response that we are logging from that function. So request equals to, okay. This should give you confidence that this is indeed happening at the server side, not at the client side. Now I promise that we're going to figure out the exact type of these request and response, and those are basically this. Next API request, and response is, you guessed it, API. Save it. Now it's not going to complain that we have not defined the type. Now going back to our learning objectives, and as promised, we understood what is API routing, how do we call it, but we have not seen any API route use cases. So let's go and see how we can create a more meaningful use case than we have right now. So I want you to imagine something like this. You are developing an app where when user clicks on some button, you return them all the data about all their customers and their age and their name. And that data is stored on some database, and we're going to simulate that database here by a dummy constant. So I'm going to copy it, paste it here. So this is the data that we want to return to the front end. And how do we do that? It's super simple. I'm gonna go here and I'm gonna say data. Now we are returning the dummy data, which is good. In the real life scenario, you will send another API request to the database, or if database is on the same machine, then you just connect to it. And get the data. Sample data first. Data would be fetch database URL, and then the same thing, you will await it, and then you get the data. Anyway, we're not doing that here, which is okay. Let's go back to our front end, and we click on this, and voila, we get all the 4 data that we needed. Nice, I like it. Now all we need to do is, on the index page, we need to show this data to the user. And here comes today's hack, or the tips, or the tricks, whatever you want to call it. So I'm going to say const first data set data customers. I'm going to call it customers because we're getting more than one customer, right? This will be equals to request it use state, and it will be initialized by an empty list because we are returning a list of items. Now we're going to learn another concept which is called map. What map does is basically it iterates over a list of items and then map some logic to each and every item of this list and then returns that mapped logic to you. So let's see that in action. So first thing first, what I'm gonna say, set customer to data. Now this customer should have all these 4 items. We'll go here underneath the button. We're gonna say customers.map, and we're gonna open parenthesis. From here you can see that it requires a callback function, which basically means that either you provide a function constant or you can write an anonymous function like that. When you apply map on any list, it gives you one item from the list at a time, and it also returns the index of that customer. You're going to return JSX, that would be P, it would be a div, of course, div. Inside the div, we're going to return an unordered list. Inside that, we're going to have a list, and here we're going to say ID name, save it. I think we can remove this so that we have more space. Maybe give it some style. Background as pink because why not? If we go back to our app and click on the button, there you go. You got all the 3 data, all the 4 data, and for each 4 data we had 3 items. Isn't that beautiful? Now we got some error in the console where Next.js is complaining that each child in a list should have a unique key. What this means is that internally Next tracks each and every element within your website or your DOM element basically. So if you click here and you inspect this element, you're gonna see that this is a div where background is pink. Now we got another div, so we got four divs basically that we ran through the loop. And React have no way to figure out or differentiate between the first div and the second div because there is no unique ID attached to it. And that's why it's complaining to us that, hey, please provide a unique key. It's fairly simple. All you need to do is you have to say key equals to something, and most of the time that something becomes our ID. And now everything should be fine. React is happy, I am happy, everybody's happy. Now you see that there is underscore next ID linked to this div. Okay, beautiful. Coming back to console. All right. I wanted to show you one more thing, and which comes handy and becomes important. Sometimes you want to do something like this. Let's say customer underscore, then you want to concatenate that ID with that string. This is valid and you can do this. However, there's a better way of doing this in React, and which is with this tilde sign, that cust underscore ID underscore, and then you want to concatenate that with that ID. Sometimes I like to do it this way so that it's crystal clear what this ID means. Nothing has changed because it doesn't matter to Next if you provide a fancy descriptive key or just numbers. But it's good for us to understand what this means. So if you click on this, you get this data. Beautiful.
Before you move to the next video, can I please request you to like this video and subscribe the channel? It will mean a world to me. Thank you.